Buonasera a tutti, buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to have you all here and perceive this great enthusiasm and willingness to experience something new. So I do believe that you have responded to our invite, and this is why you're attending tonight. There are as many people attending on streaming. It sounds normal, but it is not to be taken for granted. So this is really something that I'm happy with. Paolo Ciuccarelli, I would like to invite him on stage. Paolo is a design professor at the Eastern University, Northeast University in Boston. And together with Sara Lenzi, she comes from University in Eindhoven. They've had this idea for a something brand new relative to the world of data. I just spent a few words and then I leave you to lead the meeting, of course. Through the meet formula that uh, we've been, let's say, adopting for many years now. So our events are occupying both physical as well as digital spaces, and we try to allow many new doors to be opened. So for those of you who have never been to Meet before, you should know that Meet is a project that, yes, indeed, has a physical space within this theatre, but there's more to it. And if you be patient enough, you may go to first floor where you may appreciate an immersive room and the work of Paolo Ciuccarelli as well as Sara, Data Sonification Archive. So the project that has involved a number of many different experiences that they will be deep diving now into in their speech. So Meet with Fondazione Cariplo is here to become the kind of lighthouse, welcoming innovation, projecting itself abroad, and overcoming the critical issues and challenges that we've been surrounded with over the last few years. So a big round of applause also for Mr. Bassetti. Piero Bassetti is here with us tonight, and he's a big thinker, and he's always been a big thinker in terms of innovation, delivering innovation in the city, and not only. Great pleasure to have you here tonight also. A couple of more words. So why this project with Paolo, Sara, and everybody else is going to be with us tonight, and there's also going to be a performance at 9 o'clock later on for those of you who want to stay. So this very month in September, I'm saying, we're looking at AI development. We know that we're now being immersed in data. Everybody is now considering data set, although only experts are dealing with it, of course. But it looks like this data has to do with all of us at the same time. So this is why Meet would like people to become more acquainted with the data and knowledge around this. And there are many friends of us here also coming from Polytechnic, and they're working on how to visualize data, so such mysterious data that perhaps can allow us to understand phenomena as well as predict and find some brand new solutions. And up until a few years ago, we were even saying data for good. So data can also transform into images. So Paolo and Sara will now tell us how what data sonification is all about. So data is becoming sounds. And that is important for us, for Meet. When we open, we were welcoming a one artist who has a who has already done some work around it. It was back in 2020, and I remember where it was right before the lockdown, right before the pandemic, and I was looking at this data sonification experience in a very fascinating way. And so let's see how this data becoming sound get mingled with images and provide even a greater experience, a stronger experience, because they have something to say. So what is it that we may understand out of this? When we talk through astrophysics and climate change and all of these big topics, they sound so much bigger than us. Well, actually, let me tell you that through these creators, scientists, researchers, all of these topics can become more accessible in terms of experiencing and understanding as well. So, let's have a deep dive into it and let's try to understand more to find this solution. So, strong alliance between science, art, creativity, and technology is indeed a crucial topic here. So, get you may want to also see through the program up until October. There's going to be something else coming up in November, December. So, welcome you all. The floor to Paolo. He will take us through along with Sara, so she can't be attending in person, but she'll be here with us. She'll be virtually here with us, and we'll hear from both of them. So hopefully we'll be able to drag everybody into this beautiful discussion that we're going to have. So enjoy.
Ha già detto molto.
Well, Maragazza has already said it all. Well, she said it. I would say, yeah, the conference is over. We may leave now. Okay, I'm so very happy to see there's been such a response and that you're all interested into it. So we'll try to deserve your attendance tonight. First of all, let me tell me that for us at the Northeast University, we are very much opening a kind of a sequence of conversations. May I have the first slide of my presentation? Where we try to open up new topics. And through design, we're trying to mix together different disciplines that not necessarily have to do with one another. There's a different curator each and every time who's trying to assemble, so to speak, a panel so to deliver many different views on many different disciplines being compared with one another. So, and we're talking through data sonification tonight. So what is a data sonification? She's the expert. So we met 4 or 5 years ago, and I didn't know what data sonification was. And then we met for PhD, and quite unexpectedly, I so we came up with this journey, beautiful journey. So what is data sonification? Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Maria Grazia. Thank you, Paolo. And thank you all for participating and both in person as well as remotely. Yes, it is indeed a great surprise to see you. So many responding to our proposal tonight. So I'm sure that by the end of tonight you will get to know more about it. But I'd like to start with an example. Perhaps you don't know, but we've become acquainted with data sonification in some shape and form, and that is the counter, the Geiger counter, and it is a product, it is a device that is using data sonification in a very simple manner. So by using a mapping of data and sound, very easy, super intuitive, and one sound bit corresponds to the value of radiations in the environment, and as you increase the pace of of um, of the rhythm, the more radioactivity in the environment. So not only it is a product making use of sonification in our daily life, but also it is part of everybody's mind because it's also being used in cinema, for instance, in movies. So our ability to interpret phenomena from real world through the sound does not stop here, and actually we're not aware, for instance, of how good we are. So, to what extent human perception can actually relate to the environment, to the rest of the world, through the sound. Sound which are being emitted by natural phenomena, or else sounds which are being created in artificial environment. So man-made, literally. And again, there we've developed a one-of-a-kind ability to recognize sounds, localized sounds in the space, and decodify them. So understanding where they come from. We may recognize voices of dear friends, and we do recognize the speed of a car through the sound that it makes, although we are in an urban space, a complex urban space such as the one in the picture. So this ability to really translate the sound and emotionally react to it, starting from the 80s, has become more and more used to develop the so-called auditory display, and ICAD is definitely the reference society that we work with, because we've learned more about the interface of the sound. So community around ICAD between end of 80s, beginning of 90s, they have started to wonder and investigate sound how could sound be used and translate into data, how we could map acoustic phenomena in a more systematic way. So hence data sonification that can be used as a scientific method, scientific purposes, for scientific research purposes more specifically. So next to this definition of sonification, we can also translate this into art. This is part of this project is part of our sonification archive from Robertina Sebianic. She has developed a live performance where she is using sonification real time, surrounded by the audience, and she's working with the sound emitted by a jellyfish for an artistic experience purposes. So we use sound to represent data for scientific purposes, we said, and we use sonification to deliver artistic experiences. In between these two, there's a broad spectrums of other things, and we'll be hearing from artists, scientists, researchers, information designers, designers as well. So our panel is including many different roles, and they be telling us all the kind of experiences, the data experiences that we might gain through sonification. One last example this is going to be a dense evening, from Salvatore Iaconesi and Oriana Persico. This is showing communication between art and science, making use of sound to represent the flow of protons during protons therapy. So this is a medical topic, quite delicate, but again, it is combining together information and emotions, which is made possible through sound. That said, I'd love to leave the floor back to you, Paolo. So from theory to practice, Data Sonification Archive comes from that space you mentioned. So the space is sitting between science and art. And we saw there was this space between the two. It was still to be codified, and we understood that there was a lot going on there. And so the idea was to develop an archive, and we decided to map, of course, to map reality to understand what's going on and how sound can become an interesting experience sitting between science and art. Well, we all know that practicing goes hand in hand with the thinking of it. So we try to understand what was going on. Hence, we developed the archive. Next slide, please. So this looks like a kind of an opportunistic collection. So we try to show it in a more systematic manner. And you'll be having all of this available in the app floors. So as I was saying, the objective was to investigate, to have a hands-on approach to understand more about the experiences around the sound in the fastest way possible. So we wanted to understand the fastest way possible. We wanted to have a scientific approach, but meanwhile, unfortunately, the pandemic hit. That was something that we could not predict. So uh, let's say that we have collected different experiences also during the pandemic, and then we will be hearing from a speaker who's going to talk through astronomy. So that again says a lot on how you can put together the scientific approach and what it does translate into. So this has triggered interesting collaborations. Many people have contributed. We developed a kind of a network, we developed a kind of a hub, if you will, and we've started to attract many different people and minds. I do believe that when people make research, there's nothing really that you want to get rid of, and every step in research should be fully valued. And as designers, we perhaps have more tools to make this happen. So what we do as designers, we let's say we want to make it possible also for others to be able to access all of our research, and perhaps this archive will undergo sonification as well. But again, the bottom line was to value research through the archive, and so I think it is always worthwhile to do so. So we tried to organize tonight a panel where we have many different people people talking through science and art at the two extremes, and then we'll hear from designers as well, and they be sharing with us their experiences more associated to the engagement feelings that Maria Grazia mentioned in the beginning. Okay, I'd love to invite our guests right away. Sara, I will leave it to you to introduce our first guest. We may go from left-hand side to the right-hand side, from science to art. How about that?
Sì, ottimo. Eh,
Yeah, well, actually, as I was going through my examples, I did go from left to right also. So happy to introduce, Anita Zanella. We never met in person, and we haven't done it this time either. But we recently worked together. She is an astronomist and researcher at the National Institute of Astrophysics, and along with other colleagues, we've published an article for Nature magazine. And such publication is around the use of sonification in astronomy, so that we can understand more on how to access such research. So to support researchers and, for instance, people who have a disability, in the sight disability, so that people that are using sound to understand more about what is around them. So I'm sure Anita will tell us more about it.
Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd love to thank the organizers of this event, and thank you, Sara, for the kind invite, and I do hope we're going to meet in person soon. It is such a great pleasure to be here with us to introduce Audio Universo, so Sound Universe, how to provide sound to astronomy data. I'm a researcher at the National Institute of Astrophysics, and I do study galaxies, far away galaxies that were being formed at the beginning of universe, when universe was very young. So I do study how do galaxies get shaped, and how do they evolve over time. This image here shows you two ensembles of galaxies. So you see stars, the whiter dots with the cross around it. They're galaxies, which are all the other shapes that you see, and the colors changing from red to blue. And then there's a hot gas, which is diffused all over. Now, this is only an overlapping of many different images. So you have the optical image, so the length wave that our eyes can actually see, which is what I'm showing to you. Now we only see the light that comes from stars and galaxies. It is taken from Hubble telescope, which is very sensitive to these waves. Very different if you're using Chandra telescope, same chunk of sky, but that is very sensitive to X-rays. So what it's seeing, it is the diffused hot gas that you may appreciate in this image. Now we have this habit of thinking that astronomy is a visual science, that you need your eyes to look at the sky. Over the next few minutes, I'll show you that that is not the case. We can only see some 1,000 stars, the closest ones. We can never be able to actually see that very picture, because our eyes, our sight is too weak. Nor we can see X-rays because they sit in a portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that we cannot actually visualize. We know the relevant devices, but such devices actually, they're sensitive to numbers and not images. So what we do is that we do use a data set and transform it into something that can be visualized. Now the question is it possible to translate such numbers into sounds? Yes, it is. And that is what we're doing. Many researchers are doing this. And for instance, I'll be showing a single example, the sonification of this optical image you've seen from Hubble telescope. Stars and galaxies are being represented with medium low frequencies. In the upper part of the image, frequencies are higher, lower in the below portion. Enjoy.
Abbiamo fatto
And then we've done the same with X-ray. So we've associated higher frequencies to hot gas, and you may now listen to the sound of it.
E infine come
Finally, how can we combine different images to have a broad overall image of the universe and its constituents? Well, at the same time, we may combine sounds to listen to stars, gas, and galaxies. Now, I will make you listen this overall image, and I'm sure you can recognize the sound of stars and galaxies and have it different from the X-rays emitted hot gas.
Ecco, questo è un esempio.
And this was just an example. There are many more available, and we've actually identified all of the sounds currently available. We've detected some 100, and they're all collected in the Data Sonification Archive. And the very first project that we became familiar with, it dates back to 1968 from Donald Garnett. He had actually translated into sound the probes Cassini and Voyager, and he has discovered that there were lightnings actually happening in Saturn, the planet. Starting from then, the number of projects for sonification and astronomy has increased with 8-10 projects on a yearly basis. Such projects, they have very different goals. So some of them to be disseminated for a larger audience. Some they have research purposes. Some others are more devoted to art, to the aesthetics of sound. Some others have accessibility as a goal. So to make astronomy more inclusive to visually impaired people. And a small percentage are sonification projects being used at school for educational purposes, so to teach astronomy through sound on top of images only. Most of these projects is devoted to general audience. Only 20% is devoted to experts, let's say, researchers. I'd love to highlight something. What is crucial today, what is functional today, is not a single sense approach, only ear, only sight, but we should really be multi-sensorial. And this can deliver many different benefits for research purposes first, because actually you can broaden up the the scope, let's say, of science. So this is a multi-set that has been collected by a group of physics, and multi-dimension visualization will be really difficult. So we have to choose the data that we want to visualize. Sound designer Stephen Barras has taken this data set as has transformed it into a bell, and a physical object that may really ring, they may have a sound. And there are some physical parameters. If you by creating sound from the bell, we discovered uh, more data with respect to those that we had been able to see only through the visualization. Also, this approach can help in disseminating astronomy and making experiencing more engaging for people. This is an example of a planetarium show exhibitions where you can actually travel through um, the solar system, and all of the images that are being used are also providing sound, and this becomes very engaging for people. Multi-sensorial approach can be beneficial also for children, for instance, within the educational scope, because every one of us is learning differently. Some of us love to explore visually, some other love exploring through touch or hearing, through many different senses. So we're always experiencing reality by making use of different senses, both at school as well as research, and this can be beneficial to many. Last but not least, adding sound to images allow astronomy, which has been perceived to date as a visual science, it makes it more inclusive and accessible for visually impaired people. Wanda Diaz Merced, she is visually impaired and she's been pioneer in sonification, so the use of sound in astronomy. Therefore, I'd love to conclude and be back to my initial image, which is again an overlapping of many different images, but can also generate a sound. You may listen to it thanks to data sonification that has happened thanks to the support of sound designers, scientists, researchers, and the support of psychoacoustic experts, psychologists. So sonification stems from the great collaboration of many different researchers together. I'd love to summarize what is sonification for me. Three words: collaboration, inclusion, and discovery. Thank you.
Grazie Anita.
Anita, thank you so much for this presentation.
Grazie Anita, mi ero dimenticato lo stacchetto.
Okay, just another special word, multisensory approach. We will be talking about this in a second, and of course we will also be talking about many different subject matters or interdisciplinarity. I mean, this great cooperation between science and design. So once again, let me go back to this word, the multisensory approach. Now, today we produce data to reduce the complexity of phenomena around us. Data can be represented, and in representing it, we would like to know more. So we sort of take advantage of different senses. I mean, 5 senses, including, so to say, sonification. Sometimes we miss something. For example, some quality-related aspects. We know that in producing data and algorithms, there's something so human. So once again, multisensory approach, quality versus quantity, and then Lochner will be talking about this. Here's our next guest, interaction designer, researcher, then has started the Imaginize Lab project when he was at the Kennedy Mellon 2017, if I'm not mistaken. I like saying or quoting the fact that this is an independent research center which is based on research through design. So researchers here know what I mean. So I really like the fact of using design as a tool for research. Now, so he now works in Eindhoven, so where Sara also works. The floor goes to Dan. We will be talking about a multi-sensory approach and quality. Thank you. Okay, stage is yours.
So thank you, Paolo, and thank you, Sara, for inviting me. And I'll try and, I apologise that I'm speaking in English tonight, but hopefully the translation works. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the kind of qualitative aspects of this, as Paolo mentioned. So when we look at things like lots of things we experience, actually in the world, the qualities of them are just as much the way we make sense of things as the quantities. So, you know, a lot of, when we think of data, we often think of it being only about numbers. But actually the qualities of the things around us are often actually part of the data that we use to make sense of things, to understand what to do, particularly with an emotional dimension. So I'm just going to ask you, just close your eyes just for a moment, not for very long, and just listen. And then also touch what's in front of you as well. So reach out and touch whatever's in front of you. That's okay, that's enough. What I would say with that is, I mean, it's not very often that we pay attention perhaps to all of the things in the environment around us. I know Sara kind of introduced this as well with the idea of the city. But there is so much data and so much information in the world around us, which is mainly in terms of qualitative things or perhaps analog things, even though we often think of digital data as being the most important. And I think it's, you know, my kind of approach to this would be that we should think about paying more attention to analog in these kind of, to analog things in this world, the feel of things, what things sound like, what we can taste or what we can sense. And so this is perhaps thinking more about, you know, it's sort of a comparison between quantitative and qualitative data. And you could think about it, perhaps the whole world is a kind of interface, if you like. Like, what if the entire world, if we saw it or experienced it or heard it as a kind of thing that is producing information for us, if only we can experience it. You know, what if, or the universe perhaps, I mean, it doesn't have to be the Earth, it could be the universe around us as we've just heard. And you could think about it, this isn't my idea, lots of people have had this idea, but if you treated the whole world as a kind of analog computer that's sort of almost producing these processes that if only we pay attention, we can whether we hear it or experience it or see it, we can perhaps understand more about what's going on. It leads to a different kind of design, I think. It leads to a type of design with data where you're perhaps not just looking at how can we translate these numbers into something, but it's more about how could we translate an experience or how could we capture a phenomenon and kind of translate it in a different way. And there is some beautiful work that's been done in this more sort of qualitative approach. This is by a Norwegian consultancy, Skrækøgel, who did an exercise tracker, so something like a Fitbit or that sort of thing, but instead of using numbers, it used oil with dye in it or coloured droplets that would move as you moved your arm. You'd get different patterns forming. And I think there's something quite poetic there that's beyond simply numbers. So with some colleagues, we've developed some kind of academic approaches to this sort of qualitative interface approach or qualitative display, and I won't go into all of it, but it's really just this idea of can you sort of use the qualities of phenomena in one way or another, either representing them directly or translating them as part of a way of displaying data. Could be with sound, of course, as we're talking about tonight, but it could be with materials, physical materials, or even scent, smell, taste, and vibration, and so on. And one of the big questions with this is how abstract should it be? You know, should it be, how close should the thing that's represented be to the original phenomenon? Is it about translating it? Is it about kind of making it make sense in a different way? And this is one of the big questions in this area. And there's, we developed a kind of sort of taxonomy, which again I won't spend time going into it, but of sort of how close. How far away from the original phenomenon do you stay? Do you try and make, if you were sonifying, the amount of rain that we had, for example, would you make it using raindrop sounds or would you use something else? It might be obvious to do that, but is that necessarily the best way of doing it? So we went through this kind of spectrum of different levels of abstraction, if you like. But what it does lead to is, at one end there are very metaphorical things, and obviously this isn't sound. This is some of my students who've used sort of metaphorical model landscapes to explore things together about how they think about sort of group dynamics or sort of their kind of career paths and things. But the metaphorical idea is also something that is often used in music. It's often about kind of trying to sort of use other ways to represent phenomena. So we developed this card deck that's sort of around generating new metaphors in this sort of area. And again, at this sort of more abstracted end, there are things like this is from some of my colleagues in Eindhoven who developed these displays for exercise, which would show you almost like a physical map of where you'd been. And so over the times, places you'd gone running, the map would change and you'd see these kind of blocks appearing out of the map to show where you've been. Now, it's a very different way of visualizing exercise. It doesn't use sound in this case, but I mean, it's along the lines of something like that. You could imagine what it might sound like if you were listening to it. But then there are also within the kind of musical approach, but again, very much at this metaphorical end, there are things like this. This is some work by Josie Chambers, one of my collaborators on some projects. And she translated, it's a bit difficult to explain what this is, but this is metaphors for how different groups collaborate or co-produce things together. And she identified these certain metaphors of people within groups who, for example, took on a sort of hero role where they were always about trying to solve problems on their own, or a woodpecker role, which was someone who was always sort of pecking at the problem and kind of asking people to reframe it, to think differently. And she and some collaborators tried to turn this into actual music itself. So I'm just going to play a little bit. I won't play too much of it. Oh, sorry.
No, no, no.
Anyway, I won't play the whole thing, but what's happening there is that each part that's coming in is representing metaphorically in some way. It's trying to translate the idea of that sort of approach or that kind of personality, if you like, into a musical form. Now, that's a very abstracted form of data sonification. Is it even data sonification? I don't know. At the other end of the spectrum, you might think of things like this. This was one of my students at Carnegie Mellon who was interested in heartbeats. And he thought, well, often these things just show your beats per minute. But what if you made something that actually pulsed, like a heart, that used the heartbeat data in real time and pulsed like someone's actual heart, so you could see effectively something externally that was beating, right? And obviously, you could kind of hear some sort of electromagnetic, because it's an electromagnet here, pulsing. But it wasn't primarily about the sound, but it's along the lines of this kind of thing. And this was another one with some sort of ferromagnetic fluid in a electromagnetic an electromagnet. I think there's something there that that's at the other end of the scale. That's almost trying to translate the exact phenomenon itself into something experiential in a different way. And so, in terms of actual sonification, some of what done with some of my students and colleagues over the years, we've done quite a bit about electricity and energy, like how can we sonify that, because it's something that's largely invisible, and yet we how do we experience it in different ways. So this is I'll just show you something here, which is where an experiment we were doing around vibration. So we were taking, this is from a big spreadsheet of thousands of rows of data about the electricity use of a building. And we essentially just turned it into plugged a speaker into the spreadsheet. I mean, not directly, it was translated. But what would happen if you just sonified a spreadsheet? And we're interested here, perhaps not in the music so much, but more in the vibration. So what does it do? Can you see patterns in it as the electricity use of a building changes over the day? Could you see patterns in the vibrations that somehow give you a sense of, when is it busy, when are lots of people doing things, when is the electricity use high, when is it low? Now, I'm not saying this is useful in terms of necessarily understanding electricity or understanding energy use, but I think it gives you a different insight into these sort of invisible systems around us. And in this case, the sound, the sort of vibration sound is just from the speaker vibrating without a cone on it, or with a dish of water on it instead. But what we did then do, Gray Crawford, who's one of my students at the time, did actually produce an ambient kind of sonification of this alongside it. So you would have the using the same data. So we would have the the visual vibrations, if you like, and the sound together. So I think I'm not sure whether it is useful or not, but this is an attempt to try to kind of bring together some of these different ideas. And so just finally, I would say, these are kind of perhaps quite intricate sorts of questions, but I think when we're thinking about this sort of stuff, we should look at what qualities a sort of phenomenon in the world might have that might suggest trying to make use of it as part of a display. So maybe like Sarah's example with the Geiger counter, the fact that something has this kind of sort of, the fact that essentially that there's a decay that happens in sort of quantized points and is not just a continuous process, that suggests something that has a sound that is, rhythmic, if you like. What other phenomena are there where there's some mapping that could happen in that way? I think we can also look at things that we can't easily see or hear, but could somehow be translated into a form that we can experience in some way and could inspire it. Or it might be that we go down the route of something much more metaphorical, something much more perhaps abstracted from the original phenomenon, yet nevertheless, appropriate or kind of interesting in some way or inspirational. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'm really really excited to hear the rest of the talks. Okay.
Grazie Dan e Anita.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you, Dan. And I'm stepping back in. I know that we have 140 people listening to us on streaming, and they're interacting with us also. There are a couple of questions already that have been submitted.
Rubo 30 secondi per
30, I'm only taking 30 seconds perhaps to become more tangible, because I understand you only see me in a screen. Now, I don't want to unveil too much, but actually one of the polls will ask what are the issues, what are the phenomena that perhaps may sound more interesting for sonification purposes. Is it natural phenomena, for instance? Emotions is another recurring answer. And through these two topics, we're perhaps already revolutionizing the idea of data sonification from the ICAD, as these are two topics that, as Dan said, they're allowing qualitative to enter into quantitative. And also what Anita showed us, using abstract, using music to represent scientific data, it goes in the same direction. And indeed, one of the questions is, how can we use sonification to create a relationship amongst people who are not data expert? I'm sure we've seen many examples already, and there's more to come. There's more to come. So many guests will present. And another topic that has emerged before I leave the floor to our next guest, metaverso, artificial intelligence, so the so-called post-human space. What is the role of sound? What is the role of sonification in that domain? Okay, so I will leave these questions out there in the air. And I don't know, perhaps I would leave the floor to Paolo, or maybe I'm introducing Rafael Bresciani now. Yes, please, do so. Rafael, welcome. Media artist, composer. His work, Vox Eterna, is a sonification project and also partially visualization of data. So Vox Eterna can be the cover of tonight's event. Actually, we used a pull out to represent it here at the meet. We met with Rafael in work groups when we were talking through data shown, visually shown, and data shown through sound. So it is a huge pleasure to welcome him so that he can tell us what is his process and listen to him. Welcome, Rafael. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd love to thank Sara and Paola for this beautiful invite. I'm happy that I can share Vox Eterna with all of you. And thank you so much to the staff who's been really welcoming. Thank you. Vox Eterna is a work that I've done in 2021. Data Sonification in 10 different countries. I've chosen 10 different countries because my idea was to compare, so to create a comparison, considering COVID appearing in many different countries, and I was taking death rate to see, and I was obviously checking how all the different countries were differently reacting to that emergency. So, because I wanted to make a comparison, as I said, I've decided to adopt sonification, and I've used these elements. So I've taken daily death rates, and I've decided to choose every second 1 day. And then I was breaking down the data in age thresholds, and of course I had to ask the countries to provide me with this data, and then each age threshold was providing me with information on the sound. And then I've added some extra information here to show you how the development happens. So every 50 deaths, so when the number would hit 50 in terms of death, fatalities, well, there was a development of the harmony. Now, I will not deep dive too much into the music piece. Now, I will just, let's say, talk through the sonification piece. But of course, I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. So, I used to be I did compose 10 different tracks, and at that point I have pulled out the sonogram, which is a spectrum analysis of all the different tracks, and through a different algorithm I was creating the visuals. So this was translating into the brightness of the color. So let me start the video now. So this is a moment that I'm meant to share with you, so that perhaps it may be helpful to understand the meaning of my work. So this is the data from the United Kingdom. Age thresholds are there. Darker, the older, the younger, coming in lighter color. So I was starting the video of the UK, and now I will be starting for you again, and try to follow the sound, keeping the data in mind. Okay, so now I'm talking, so but I should be silent. So remember, we started in March. It includes January 1, 2020 until December 31st. So the first 60 seconds depict 60 days. Okay, as a one last thing, this is a piece of art. This is an artwork, and my idea was to engage people and not necessarily to have a full correspondence with data. But I think it's still an interesting exercise to understand more about sonification.
concludere.
Okay, I'd love to draw my conclusions, and I hope it was clear that whilst we're experiencing those 60 seconds of silence, then we came up with a greater intensity, and then it was lowered down, which may sound kind of a mantra. And then in the end, towards the end, data would show that a second wave would hit. So there's a plateau moment, and then it leaves it to a second wave. Thank you so much for your kind attention. What is that? I believe we're struggling. You're struggling now in understanding the underlying meaning. But I'm sure we all have a problem. Never in history we've never had so much data available to understand what was going on, and such as in the pandemic, for instance. Never in history we have had so many media languages, so many ways to represent data. And therefore, now, of course, we want to make use of this all. And so many of the evidences that we've collected have remained unheard. Data was not read, not interpreted, and things that we were not expect would happen, then they really happened. So visualization and sonification of data now is living space to what we're still looking for. What I believe is fairly clear is that, of course, we will most likely develop different relationships with data, because we are now being engaged also from a feeling standpoint, and of course we also understand that not everybody can access data and data interpretation the same way. So this very frustration that I've described is what triggered an exercise at the Politecnico in Milan, which we called the info poetry a few years ago. And as there's no language closer to feelings than poetry, and we wanted to kind of stimulate, we wanted to tease students so that we could put these two worlds together, so information and poetry all together. So some people are being immersed in technology, and they completely lose sight that as human beings, there's other ways that we may approach the study and the research of reality. So back in 2014, at the Politecnico in Milan, they started to deep dive further on how we could have all of our senses having relationships in trying to understand more about reality. And we were pushed by the frustration that I've described before, but also because we were very curious to see what could be next. And this is a beautiful introduction of Michele Mauri from Politecnico in Milan. He is the director of Density Design Research Lab. Currently, he deals with data transformation, and he'll be telling us about this very experience, which are still part of the educational course. Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Paolo, and thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I'm the coordinator of this work group called Density Design Lab within Politecnico in Milan Design Department, to be more accurate. So as a research work group, we deal with communication and visual transformation of information data. Paolo and Sara know very well about it. And although they know, they've still decided to invite me over. So, so my title perhaps would be Beyond the Visual. And I'd love to take advantage of this beautiful invite to draw your attention on to an educational practice that shortly I'm about to introduce.
Questa esperienza didattica
Such experience was taking place within the final synthesis design studio, which is the last studio that the students of year 4 and 5 they have to attend at the Politecnico in Milan. Many different themes out there. The one that we do recommend now is how to represent data and information. Students for 4 months are being asked to work on data, information, visualization, and we try to also focus on the contact points between communication design and all of these topics that I mentioned. So amongst the things that we ask them to do, and more specific, there's an exercise which we've called the info poetry, and it's been introduced by Paolo. So info poetry was being established back in 2014 thanks to Salvatore Zingale, a semiotic professor, along with Paolo Ciuccarelli. So the idea was to visualize, to represent data from a simple reading way, which is what we've always relied on, to something that would allow you to make experience of that phenomenon being represented in a different way. Starting from 2014, so of course we've developed a number of works, 60 students every year, so we've collected hundreds of works and projects. I have to say that students have been really enthusiastic about it, and they've delivered a number of things: installations, posters, books, and they've also made some video clips. And video clips clearly show, perhaps in a bit easier way, the contact points that I was mentioning before. I would say that all across, students have realized that they wanted to rely on sound as well, not just a graphic visualization, but they also wanted to rely on sound, either to represent or, let's say, to allow this graphic shapes to say more. Because, of course, we cannot go through all of them. I've selected few of them, and I've tried to identify some of the approaches that the students have taken and developed. Some of them may look very simple, but as simple as they are, they're very interesting. Let me tell you, the first one is the use of sound to communicate frequencies. This may even lead during performances. Some performances have been organized, some objects making noise, and the noise allows us to experience that phenomenon. And the topic in this particular case was the bikes being abandoned in many different cities when bike sharing system was all of a sudden were all of a sudden failing. So some bike sharing services were shutting down, and a huge number of bikes were being abandoned. So these are the matches that are representing the bikes, the abandoned bikes, the quantity as well as the frequency. Well, this was happening throughout 2017 in China, many different cities in China. So very easy mapping, right? These are just objects falling. But because you see it and you hear it, you may perceive the frequency.
questo tema dell'utilizzare
So sound that gets the frequency across has been adopted in other examples, perhaps not making use of physical objects, but making, let's say, showing it through video clip, for instance. In this very case, the student meant to represent the so wanted to give a sense of time passing by in different moments of life. And perhaps we've all had this experience when the first few years of a person's life seem to be very lengthy, and the more you grow up, and the more frequent they becomes. And the use of these pictures being shown one after the other, you see, the perception is changing now. Perception time. These are all the photographs from his birth to his elderly age. You see, frequency is telling us about this phenomena changing in frequency.
Quindi un applauso allo studente.
Yes, big round of applause to our students. Sure, great job. And when you mean to represent data, you may also want to get across presence or absence, for instance. And in this particular case, a girl student, so she meant to provide a visualization of freedom of expression existing in many different European countries. Again, the strategy is fairly simple. In the background, you may hear people talking, and the volume it tells about the extent to which there is a freedom of speech. The greater the volume, the more the freedom of speech. Kind of counterintuitive in this case, because actually the number, it shows what it is preventing freedom. So the greater the volume, the greater the number, the lower the volume.
Altri studenti invece.
So other students decided to do something different. I mean, they really wanted to investigate, if you will, this key topic, which is sound. For example, this student decided she wanted to represent another phenomenon that you can see quite often in our videos, which is the communicating a value. So the value can change, so it can either go up or down, increase or decrease over time. In this case, she worked on the growth of the population of different cities. So the population of the city is a value. This value was used to define the wavelength and the of the sound produced. Now, this is interesting also from the visual point of view. After the sound, every city was also represented with the help of a pattern, which is that kind of pattern that you see. I'm sure it happened to you. Maybe you watched some videos on YouTube where you put some sounds on the loudspeakers, depending on the frequencies. The sound moves and creates different patterns. Okay, so they have used the same patterns to communicate a different type of information. Now, to wrap up, I'd like to show you another, a different type of example. It's different, but in my opinion, it's interesting. So are we talking about sonification here or not? Now, inside our teaching experience, so we have worked together on info poetry, but students also work in teams. Now, when they do teamwork, one of the things we ask them to do is to analyze, identify new digital technologies. At the same time, we ask them to understand which kind of relationship you can really create with our lives. Now, in this very case, this team or group of students decided to analyze different platforms and well, basically dating platforms. So they have also analyzed their results and they told us that with these platforms it's very easy to log in, but it is very difficult to remove personal data. Very difficult because of the way interfaces are conceived, designed and built. This is what students did. So they have worked with plenty of data. They went through the process every platform requires to unsubscribe. So in this case we don't have a data set, so maybe sort of a table, but we have a process. So what about the role played by sound in this process? They have recorded all of these actions and then they turned all of this visually. So to really communicate the sense of hostility of this interface in terms of unsubscribing, they have used a synthetic voice that in a way represents the perspective or point of view of the application itself. In this case, this is Badu.
Good morning, Kyle. I'm glad you visited me. It's been forever. Where have you been? You have a lot of people waiting for you to reply to their messages. There is no more time to waste. I also have a lot of possible matches for you. You should start checking them out. Chiara seems like a lovely lady. You should answer her. By the way, how was that date with Mark? You didn't tell me anything. Do you want to edit anything about your profile? Maybe add a new profile picture? How about adding more social media profiles? That will help you get more matches. Kyle, come on, do something. Those people are waiting for you. Wait, what are you searching for? Kyle, what is it that you want to do? Why are you doing that? Do you really want to be invisible? People will never know how great you are if you go invisible. Good. You didn't turn that on. But what are you searching for now? Kyle, I think you should stop this and go reply to the messages now. Wait, Kyle, do you really want to delete your account? Kyle, that's a mistake. You can take a break and think about it more, but don't delete your account. You would miss out on so much if you did. I could be the reason you find your soulmate. Do you want to risk never finding anyone? Please, Kyle, I don't deserve this. You don't deserve this. Allow me change your mind. I can give you premium access for free. Just stay. If you try premium, I'm sure you can give me another chance. Oh, come on. But why? You used to visit me every day. What happened? You haven't found anyone interesting? Well, if you use me more, you can find plenty more people who are just as interesting as you. Kyle, don't do it. Kyle, please.
Okay then, to wrap up, well, first of all, I hope you have enjoyed these cases. I think it's a series of examples or strategies. In some cases, this was quite simple, but they may be very effective in many different sectors. All of these examples may be reused over and over again. Thank you.
Grazie Michele.
Michele, thank you so much. I'm back just for a couple of comments, quick ones, and I'd like to share some questions. By the way, I mean we saw a couple of projects. I found them very interesting. The one where frequency increased when time increased. Um, there's one question. Do we have sonification without time as a variable? Well, it's an interesting question, so look forward to getting answers from our guests tonight. And then the other system using voice to turn, stalking into something transparent. Um, so maybe without no application start really stalking us. So we should, disrupt the official sonification definition. In many cases, voice is not included. People say that sonification of data is the non-verbal use of sound to represent data. Well, I'd like to say that this type of using voice, that the voice was an excellent and effective example. Just one short comment on what I can see here from the polls we are launching. This is really surprising for me. 60% of responders say that there's plenty of, sound material that you can use to present the phenomenon. They would prefer abstract sounds or artificial sounds. I mean, abstract sound use seems to be more appropriate versus concrete, tangible sounds, or even natural sounds, or even versus music. Now, this is maybe not really intuitive, or maybe, well, we have people here who really like to start new adventures because this is more difficult to decrypt.
Sull'uso un ultimo cenno che il 50.
Very last point, the 50% of participants, so one participant out of two, tells us that he or she is working in the design industry. So this is the reason why we like, choosing new innovative materials. Many people are here just for curiosity, not many musicians. Now, let me now introduce the loud numbers from the UK, so Miriam Quick and Duncan. Now, Miriam, Duncan, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight. You often use music in your sonification exercise. So in terms of using music in the academic world of sonification, but some people don't like it because, of course, it is adding a new psychological variable, maybe an emotional, a cultural variable, which is very heavy. So the loud numbers projects, if you don't know it, well, please do follow the podcasts and the activities carried out by Miriam and Duncan, designer, composers. Now, Miriam and Duncan are, tirelessly working on sonification as something which is great and useful in the real world and not only research and art to establish relationships with data. So in their podcasts, they explain and they also show sonification projects. They also tell us how they managed to build them, which is, in my opinion, a great step forward. I think sonification can really become a method or a system that can really be used by everyone in our everyday life. So we've put together, this evening. This is what we hope. Okay, this is it. Miriam and Duncan, benvenuti. Welcome.
Thanks very much for the loud numbers, and we are a data sonification studio. So I'm based in the UK and Duncan is based in Sweden. And we very much, as Sara just said, we very much like to work on the musical end of the sonification spectrum. And we're also really we're really into telling stories with sound. So I guess you could say we're at the point where music and storytelling meet. And as Sara said, Loud Numbers started as a podcast, and each episode we turn a different data story into sound, and very specifically into a music track with lots of different genres. We have a jungle track, we have a track which is a techno track, we've got one that's very much in Baroque style, very contrapuntal, so lots and lots of musical styles covered, but all driven by data. And in terms of stories, we cover diverse things. We cover climate change, we cover insect decline, and we also have an episode which is about sonifying taste, specifically the taste of beer. So it's very much exploring that kind of space, that synesthesia space. You can listen to the podcast at loudnumbers.net or on our usual providers. And I'm going to hand over to Duncan now. He's going to talk about a smaller sonification that he made this year.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And yeah, thank you to the organizers for inviting us here today. So over the summer, as you might remember, many parts of Europe, including the UK, experienced record-breaking temperatures. And when this happened, I was kind of thinking that this might be an interesting opportunity to explore a few things that we've been thinking about for a little while. One of those things was that I thought it would be interesting to explore what a heat wave sounds like. In Britain, a heat wave, it might not necessarily be true in Italy, but in Britain, a heat wave has historically been seen as something to enjoy and celebrate. You know, that's when you go to the beach, you take time off work, you enjoy the heat. But it feels like that has begun to change in recent years as more people become aware of the effects of climate change. I also thought it might be interesting to kind of explore some of the data around how a heat wave develops over time. Like, how clear would it be in the temperature records that there is a heat wave going on? Because every day we have large differences between day and nighttime temperatures. And then finally, I also wanted to kind of see if it was possible to do like rapid response sonification in response to news events, creating a sonification in a really short space of time, maybe just like a few hours immediately after something happens. I think probably the most useful thing to do here is to play you what we created, and then I'll talk through a little bit about how it worked and everything. It's only about 2 minutes long. It's quite a lot simpler than some of the examples that you've heard tonight. And at the start, I explain how all the parameter mappings and everything work. So yeah, I'll pass you over to me from about 3 months ago. You're about to hear a loud numbers sonification of Britain's record-breaking temperatures in July 2022. It uses data from 3 weather stations where some of the hottest temperatures were experienced: Lincoln, Hounslow, and Gatwick Airport. The louder and rougher the sound, the hotter the temperatures, which rise in the day and fall at night. The numbers range from a low of 11 degrees to a new record high for the UK of 40 degrees. You'll hear a clock tick for every hour that passes. Let's begin on the 16th of July. Seventeenth of July. 18th of July. 19th of July. 'Thanks to Jonathan Shaw for his ticking clock sound, used under a Creative Commons Attribution 4 license. Thanks to Weather Underground for the temperature data. For more sonifications, visit loudnumbers.net. Finally, if you're worried about climate change, one of the most effective things you can do is talk about it to your friends, family, colleagues, and political representatives. Thanks for listening. All right, so there's probably a few things to talk about here. The chord that you heard during the piece was made up of the temperature readings from 3 different weather stations, and each of the notes in the chord represents a different weather station. And one thing that's quite interesting is that you get a sort of hazy quality from that that comes from the small differences in temperature between them. And I think that hazy quality really, really suits, the feeling of a heat wave. The chord itself is a diminished A chord, and that was also done to kind of set the mood, the tone, the emotion of this piece. We wanted it to sound almost like ominous and threatening. And also in terms of how we mapped the data to the sounds, temperature is actually kind of in there twice. There's sort of two ways that temperature is happening. It is there in terms of the volume of the sound, but also as I said, the roughness of the sound, which is the cutoff of a low pass filter. And the volume encoding uses the normal range of Britain's temperatures in July. I took the minimum and maximum averages over time, and I mapped those to like the lowest and highest volume in the data set. But obviously during this event, there are lots of temperatures that exceeded those averages. And I showed that by using the filter cutoff, the roughness of the sound, to map the temperatures that exceeded this threshold, the part of the temperature data that is not normal. So I think this is kind of an interesting way to hear the normal daily rise and fall of temperature, but also hear when things sort of go abnormal and a bit wrong. And then the second thing is about kind of the process of how I turned this around so fast. I made that whole sonification in about an afternoon, I think, more or less. And the process of that was quite streamlined, really. First, I got the data from Weather Underground, as I said in the presentation. I needed to do a little bit of cleaning on that data, but the process wasn't very difficult there. Then I created the sonification itself using a tool called sonifying, which is a coding tool based on the coding language Ruby. And luckily, we've made quite a lot of the sonifications for the Loud Numbers podcast through sonifying. So I already had some chunks of code that I could steal from past projects. So that sped up the process quite a bit. And then once I had that raw sonification, I needed to write and record the introduction and the outro as well, so that people knew how it worked. And I basically did that like sitting literally right here with this microphone in front of my computer. And you might notice that I also added a really clear call to action at the very end about linking the project directly with climate change. It's really, really important to me that people make that connection and that people have something that they can do once they've heard it, if they have feelings about it. So I made sure that I wanted to add that. And then, yeah, I glued all the different bits together, the sonification and the voiceover in Logic, which is a digital audio workstation software from Apple. It was a pretty simple mix. And then finally, and I think this is quite important, I put it into this really, really useful and free tool called Headliner, which turned the audio that I had into a video. Because one of the annoying things about many social media platforms where I wanted to share this work is that there isn't really an easy way to share audio alone. It's very easy to share pictures and it's very easy to share video, but it's really hard to share audio. So I used this tool to quickly generate a video from it and used the Loud Numbers color scheme and just added their auto-generated subtitles and the waveform that you saw around the logo in the middle. And then I sent it out into the world. And I think that being able to create these kinds of very quick sonifications can be really, really useful for getting attention from the public on, a news event, and potentially even in journalism and news where you want to quickly represent data, but maybe a chart isn't the best way to represent that data. We've seen several situations in the presentations tonight where sound works better than visuals do in some cases. So yeah, that was very much one of my objectives, just to kind of like see how quickly you can make a sonification, really. And doing this very, very quick work is often tricky for a lot of people because, people might not necessarily have the coding skills to develop these quick sonifications. And so one of the projects that we've been working on quite a lot over the past year has been a module for the modular synthesizer simulator called VCV Rack. and you can load data into it, and it'll automatically do the normalization of that data and turn it into signals, voltage signals, that you can use to control other parts of a synthesizer. So a filter or volume or pitch or whatever you like, you can plug it into the whole rest of the ecosystem that surrounds VCV Rack. And we've kind of been doing this because we've been looking at sonification tools, and they seem to be split into two categories, really. There are the simple tools that don't require you to be able to code, but you can't make anything that is very, very complicated with them. And then there's the very complicated platforms where you do need to know how to code, and that's a much more difficult path, like a step up to. So we think that our VCV Rack module fills a gap here a little bit in terms of tools where you don't necessarily need to learn how to code to be able to do it, but you can still make quite interesting and complicated pieces with it. It has a lot of flexibility. But that isn't everything that we've been doing at Loud Numbers since the podcast came out. So Miriam, do you want to talk about a few of the other things that we've been up to?
Sure. So since the podcast came out, we've been really lucky to be able to get several commercial and art commissions. And we've worked for everyone from Walmart to the Museum of London, sonifying COVID data for them. We've worked recently on a climate sonification that will be exhibited as part of a really large audiovisual experience in Egypt as part of the COP27 climate talks. We're currently working on a sonification of air quality data from Bristol. And we're always looking for new projects. So if you have data or if you have just an idea that you'd like to explore, then do please get in touch with us via our website, loudnumbers.net, or we're at Loud Numbers on social media.
Scusate, stavo per parlare in inglese, è il momento mio di dire grazie.
Okay, time has come to say grazie.
Miriam e
Thank
Duncan,
you
non
so
ero
much,
sicura
Miriam and Duncan. Okay, so as I told you, I guess, and I think, I mean, what you're doing is so interesting and important to make sure that, you know, the use of sound can be added to visual modes and many other sensory modes. So I'm sure that this will become, you know, much more, let's say, common and widespread than it is today. Okay, just asking Paolo how the situation is in the room, because I mean I'm receiving so many questions. Of course, well, there are so many interesting questions. Paolo, for example, there's a question from him, and he asks, what about the subjectivity of listening? So the subjective perception that we mentioned also this evening in data sonification, whose ambition is to, this is my personal comment, I mean, it presents values which are objective, but then, you know, of course, listening is subjective. And then once again, second question from another Paolo. What about emotions? Are they helping or are they an obstacle, so a hindrance to data sonification? This is another great, you know, well, comment. And by the way, it's one of the fil rouge, so one of the leitmotifs of the questions I can see here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, you can, you know, take a break, and then we will be back for the performance at 9 p.m. Thank you so much for your skills that you have shared with us this evening. 30 minutes ago, we should have started Q&A, so we're running a little late. And, well, I don't know how to manage this now. We can just get 1-2 questions before, I mean, we close. Okay, maybe just one or two questions here from the room here in Milan, so that we can interact. Okay, just a very short introduction. Your name? I'm a student and I study philosophy. Now, looking at the universe, can we imagine a meta sound? Okay, well, I think we can close here. Well, Sara, I hope, are you still there? I need help. Now, meta design is so interesting. Metaverse is also interesting. What about the meta sound? What a question I'm really not able to answer. Sara, can you help? Meta sound. Does it exist? Can it exist, of course, when thinking about or of the universe?
Ma sicuramente passerei la parola.
Well, the floor goes to our panel, okay, because once again, I'm sure this meta sound, every sound is a meta sound. I mean, we feel the sounds, with our ears, but also our own experiences, and then our memories.
Il contesto in cui siamo, ma
And the context we live in. I'd like to know what our guests think about this. Anita. Okay, so don't know what you mean exactly by meta sound. Anyway, I'd like to highlight one thing when I talk about astronomy and sonification. We cannot hear the sound directly, I mean, of the celestial bodies, I mean, of the universe. It's a pressure wave requiring a means of propagation. So what we receive from celestial bodies is the light. If you want, we can transform the light into sounds. So this is an indirect, arbitrary transformation. The only direct sound that I know for the time being that I have listened to from a celestial body which is not the Earth is the sound from Mars. Now the sound from Mars can propagate because there's a very thin layer of atmosphere allowing the sound to be transmitted. Perseverance landed on Mars, and for the first time ever there were two microphones on board recording the sound of the probe but also the sound of the environment. And what we can hear, the only sound we have is the wind.
Un'altra domanda che
we can take a second question. Just a second question. Is anyone using are you using the spatialization of data? Yes, spatialization of the sound for sonification purposes.
Una installazione.
Well, upstairs there's an installation, there's a specific device, his name is Oculus. You can really enjoy this sonification experience which is based on space, so spatialized, okay? We have a tangible, concrete answer, so please visit. I mean, the first floor. Oculus is a visual agency project which is one of the partners. I'd like to thank partners of this project, by the way, because we have Paolo Ciuccarelli. Can I have the panelists here on the floor just to say goodbye?
La gallery, vi invito tutti a fare un salto.
There's a beautiful gallery upstairs, this beautiful place so you can explore sonification. If I'm not mistaken, in the first gallery, or gallery 3, I mean the biggest one, you can enjoy digital sonification, so there's an archive. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really would like to thank the audience here. So 9 p.m. we have a performance, so exactly in 30 minutes. Now, Sara, thank you so much. Well, you are such an active but also virtual person tonight. You are an excellent. I also would like to thank all the live, let's say, news staff. Thank you so much for managing this evening with Sara. This is a beautiful hybrid, meeting. We also have phygital. Okay, well, this is a phygital, architecture. Once again, we've been able, to build the dialogue. So Sara is here with us, but she's now in Barcelona. No, where are you now? Bilbao, sorry. Okay. So you are, well, on air and in the air. Okay, then. I'm inviting you to, you can eat and drink something, but then in 30 minutes we have a performance that we put together with Sara. We have artists, there will be artists right here in 30 minutes. this will be a real-time sonification live performance. So it will be, let's say, a visual but also auditory performance. We will be talking about drought. So we will be listening to the main river here in Italy, whose name is Po. It's a beautiful experimentation, so it's one of the possibilities we have with sound, working in real time. So once again, real time is also an interesting variable together with improvising. So what do we mean by improvising? You are all invited to stay here with us. Just would like to say thank you so much for this beautiful overview on a very brand new topic. We talked about many different, subjects related with sound plus images, relations, or let's say, links with pictures and images. At last, I met another very important part of Milan and many other companies and organizations doing research. So thank you so much for staying. I'm sure you have understood the importance of this beautiful development. Once again, welcome to meet. Please be back in 30 minutes. I'd like to thank the local university. I also would like to thank our partner, the visual agency based in Milan. Thank you so much for this beautiful immersive experience. The entire Meet team, thank you so much for what you do for us. Okay, please be back in 25 minutes for this beautiful live performance.